What would Martin Luther King say if he were alive to see that? If he were sitting there in that gilded theater, hearing the joke, seeing the reaction, listening to the silence that followed? What would he say to the world after the slap? Not about the gesture itself, but about everything that led up to it, because Martin Luther King Jr. never limited himself to the surface. He delved into what hurt, what was hidden, and if he were watching, he wouldn't just look at the stage, he would look at the journey. Do you really think that slap was born there, that night? Do you believe that moment was just impulse, anger, loss of control? Is it that simple for you? Because it's not for me, and it wouldn't be for Martin Luther King either. He would say that there's an accumulation, a weight that grows and drags inside the chest of a man who has been trying for decades to fit into a place where everything was made to remind him that he doesn't truly belong. Will Smith didn't start at that Oscars. He came from much earlier. Decades trying to walk a line that doesn't allow for stumbles. Decades being polite, correct, gentle, profitable, likable. Decades saying yes, accepting silently, smiling in interviews, lowering his head between the lines. He was the palatable black man for Hollywood, the one who doesn't bother, the one who does what is expected of him, the one who stays inside the box. Martin Luther King already spoke about this in his sermons. He knew how much it costs a black man to try to be accepted in a world that only tolerates him when he adapts to what they expect of him. And it doesn't matter how much he tries, because just one slip-up, just one, is enough to undo everything that has been built. This doesn't happen to everyone, but it happens frequently when you have skin burned by the sun and blood full of history. The question that no one wanted to ask at that Oscars was, why was the reaction to Will's mistake so much harsher? Why so much scandal, so much judgment, so much thirst for punishment? Martin Luther King wouldn't say Will was right, but he would ask why this mistake needed to be treated as a threat to the entire world, and he wouldn't ask to cause trouble. He would ask because that's how you expose the wound. How many white actors have made mistakes? How many have caused turmoil, broken contracts, hit, drank, assaulted? And how many of them were expelled, cancelled, torn apart like they did with Will? You know the answer. You saw it. But maybe you pretended you didn't. Maybe you protected yourself in the discourse of civility, respect, good conduct. But that's not what it's about. It's about a pattern, about a system, about a logic that demands saintliness from someone who already bleeds every day just to exist. Martin Luther King would have talked about the weight of being black in a place that only accepts you as long as you serve, about how much emotional control is demanded from someone who lives in a constant state of tension. Can you imagine what that's like? Having to be gentle when you're hurt, having to smile when you're insulted, having to stay calm when everything inside you wants to scream, and still knowing that if you lose that control, you'll be the monster, never the one who provoked you. Will didn't just hit Chris, he hit everything he repressed. All the let-it-go moments, every time he was disrespected and had to pretend it was nothing, every veiled criticism, every time he was compared to others, as if his talent always needed to be measured by a ruler that was never made for him, every time they said he was only there because he was the right black man. You may not agree with his attitude, but tell me, do you really think he was the first to lose control, or was he just the first who couldn't? Martin Luther King would say that the problem isn't just the slap, it's the silence that comes after. It's the discomfort that no one wanted to look at. It's the type of demand that only falls on some, because it's not just about what you do, it's about who does it. And if it's a black man, the rules change, they always change. Martin Luther King said that injustice is shaped in the invisible, that racism often is what is not said, what is expected, what is demanded, and what refuses to understand. Will Smith was judged as if he had never done anything right, as if decades of work meant nothing, as if his humanity had an expiration date. And that says more about the world than about him, because for many, a black man is only worth as long as he serves, as long as he entertains, as long as he is silent. When he steps out of line, he becomes a threat. Even if the reason for the pain is legitimate, even if what provoked the break was a humiliation. What is expected of a black man when he is insulted? That he smiles? That he controls himself? That he accepts it? Martin Luther King would ask, Why is more empathy demanded from someone who already carries the scars? Why is rationality demanded from someone who has lived with exclusion since birth? Will's case is not an exception. It's a mirror of what happens every day with so many others, at work, on the street, in relationships. The black man needs to be educated. He needs to be strong. He needs to be calm. He needs to be brilliant. He needs to be everything, and even then he will still be questioned. Because the black man's mistake is not just a mistake, it's a threat to order. It's a reason to annul everything he was. Martin Luther King wouldn't say the slap was beautiful, but he also wouldn't pretend it was just a slap. He wouldn't ignore what came before, what pushed that gesture, what overflowed there. Because he knew that when pain doesn't find space to exist, it bursts out wherever it can. And if it can't be spoken, it explodes. That's what we're talking about. About an old, swallowed, denied pain. That didn't start that night. That was only seen there because it became impossible to hide. Can you understand now? Can you feel that it's not about glamour, about fame, about the stage? It's about what the stage doesn't show. It's about the price of having to be perfect when no one else needs to be. It's about the burden that you don't see, but that weighs so much that one day you can't carry it anymore. Martin Luther King would have cried seeing that, not because of the scandal, but because of what he knows so well. The moment when a black man stops being able to endure what no one should ever have to endure. He wouldn't justify it, but he would understand it. And he would ask you to try to understand it too. Not the slap, but the silence before it, the accumulation, the humiliation, the demand, the fear, the limit, the explosion. What you do with that now is up to you. You can even say that all this is an exaggeration. You can try to convince yourself that it has nothing to do with color, with race, with origin. But if you close your eyes to that, you become part of the structure that insists on silencing what has been screaming inside us for centuries. Because what happened to Will Smith that night was the public revelation of a pressure that was already there, silent, subtle, hidden between the lines. The world saw the outburst, but it didn't see the accumulation. Martin Luther King always warned us that what kills is not just the cry of the oppressor, but the silence of those who watch and choose not to act. And I ask you, how many were silent after that scene? How many rushed to condemn without even trying to understand what had been swallowed for so long? Why is it so much easier to punish the reaction than to confront the provocation? How many times does a black man's dignity need to be violated before someone realizes that this is also violence? Because the joke about Jada wasn't just a joke. It was another blow in a history of disrespect. And when a man stands up, even in a misguided way, it's because maybe he can't stand to see the woman he loves being targeted while everyone laughs. It's easy to say he exaggerated. It's difficult to recognize that this reaction wasn't born out of nowhere. Martin Luther King would say that this society has built a perverse logic where the black man needs to swallow offense as if it were praise, smile in the face of humiliation as if it were part of the contract. And when he finally says enough, the answer is not welcoming, it's exile. The same system that applauds his performance rejects his humanity. And that says it all. Do you really think Will was the only one? That this story is about an isolated case? Then tell me, why do so many black people grow up hearing that they need to be twice as good to get half as far? Why is it still expected that we remain silent in the face of injustice, to maintain good coexistence, to not seem aggressive, to not reinforce stereotypes? Have you ever stopped to think about what that does to someone's mind? Do you know what it's like to police yourself all the time? To analyze every word, every gesture, every tone of voice? Do you know what it's like to be afraid of seeming too angry, too confident, too emotional? Because any of those things can be used against you. Will lived that. And when everything overflowed, there was no empathy. There was judgment. Martin Luther King wouldn't have applauded the slap, but he would never turn his back on the man behind the gesture. He wouldn't say, "You failed." He would ask, "Who failed you?" Because that's the question no one wanted to ask. Who failed Will? Who pressured him so much that he believed that only the rupture would bring relief? Who created this environment where black people are only accepted if they are perfect? He was placed on a pedestal where there was no room for error. And a pedestal is a trap. It seems like honor, but it's prison. It's the place where you are revered, but you can't be human, where every slip-up turns into a fall, where expectations crush you, and when you fall, there is no outstretched hand, only stones. Martin Luther King would say that this is not justice, this is selective punishment. It's punishment disguised as ethics. It's control dressed up as order. And the cruelest thing is that this control is only for some, because the others make mistakes, stumble, come back, are forgiven. But when the mistake comes from a black person, the world's memory gets shorter. The successes disappear. The respect vanishes. The entire trajectory is put in check. It's as if the humanity of the black man were a temporary concession, a privilege that can be withdrawn at any moment. Just one mistake, one gesture, one sound out of tune, and everything crumbles. This is not justice. This is structure. This is racism. And if you're there thinking that it's not quite like that, I invite you to remember how many times you've seen white men being protected, defended, shielded. How many times their mistakes were treated as lapses, as illnesses, as difficult moments. Now think how many black men have had that same treatment. How many were understood? How many had the benefit of the doubt? Martin Luther King spoke about the exhaustion, not just the physical but the emotional. The exhaustion of having to explain all the time, of having to justify your existence, of having to apologize for feeling. This exhaustion is corrosive. It slowly consumes the soul, until the day the body reacts. And it's not pretty, but it's real. Will Smith reacted. In the wrong way, yes, but he reacted like someone who is suffocated, like someone who sees no way out, like someone who no longer accepts smiling while their pain is the subject of jokes. And that should make us think, not about what he did, but about what was done to him, about what is done every day with so many others who don't even have the chance to react. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever needed to swallow a disrespect to not lose your space? Have you ever needed to pretend that it didn't affect you? Have you ever needed to be strong when everything in you wanted to collapse? That has a name. That's racial pressure. That's survival. And that needs to be said out loud, because pretending it doesn't exist is perpetuating what is killing from within. Martin Luther King fought for the humanity of each person to be recognized. He knew that there is no true peace where there is constant humiliation, that dignity is not built on top of denial, and that no justice is real if it only applies to some. What happened to Will Smith is not about fame, it's about humanity, about how much a man's soul is worth when it stops entertaining, when it shows itself wounded, when it reacts. Can you look at that without turning your face away? Do you still think that was just a slap? Do you still insist on looking at the scene without asking yourself how many old wounds were sitting there along with Will? You saw the reaction, but did you really see what led up to it? How many years of silence, of self-denial, of forced control do you believe fit inside someone before something breaks inside? Martin Luther King Jr. would be looking at you intently now. He wouldn't say anything immediately. He would just let the silence weigh. That kind of silence that forces you to face the truth without distractions. And then he would ask if you can still sleep peacefully, thinking that all this is about behavior, about posture, about education. He would look at you like someone who knows that you have already felt, at some point in your life, the pain of having to swallow your own dignity just to continue being accepted. You live in a world that still chooses who can be human in public, who has the right to fail, who can get excited without becoming a threat. And if you're black, the permissions change, the margins tighten, the ruler rises, and forgiveness disappears. There's no escaping that. You can even try to justify, rationalize, repeat ready-made speeches, but that won't hide the wound. Yours, the others, the one you may have gotten used to ignoring. What they did to Will after the Oscars was quick, cruel, efficient. Cancellation, judgment, expulsion, all this with a speed that impresses, and all this coming from an industry that for years used him as a symbol of racial success. As long as he stayed silent, as long as he didn't cause discomfort, as long as he didn't show fury, pain, revolt. Martin Luther King would say that society creates a script for the black man, and if he improvises a line, the stage collapses. He can be a hero, but only as long as he is docile. He can be an idol, but only as long as he is controlled. He can be a reference, but never human. because the humanity of the black man is still seen as uncomfortable. And when he refuses to hide his emotions, everything that has been built becomes a threat. Do you realize how insane that is? How cruel it is to demand from someone a level of self-censorship so deep that he ends up becoming a ghost of himself. And when that ghost rebels, you call him a monster. How many more times will this be repeated until you recognize that the mistake is not in the isolated gesture, but in the structure that pushed him to that point? The question that Martin Luther King would throw in the middle of the room, without hesitation, would be another. He would ask who will stand up when the next will is judged, who will have the courage to say that this reaction, however controversial it may have been, was a human cry within a system that only listens to applause. He would ask how long black men will need to hide their pains to be considered civilized. So I ask you, looking directly at you, how many times have you silenced yourself to avoid reinforcing a stereotype? How many times have you swallowed what you wanted to say because you knew you'd be called aggressive, unstable, disrespectful? How many times have you seen someone being diminished and stayed quiet? You know. You remember. Martin Luther King said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It's not just a pretty phrase, it's a real curse. Because when you allow someone to be dehumanized, you pave the way for that same dehumanization to reach you. And it will. Sooner or later. If not you, then someone you love. And then there's no hiding. What they did to Will, they do every day to thousands. In the workplace, in the justice system, at school, in the bank line, in the suspicious glance, in the backhanded compliment. In the criticism disguised as advice. You've felt it. And if you haven't, look closely around you. It's happening now as you listen to this. You can keep ignoring it. You can keep saying it's not your problem. But know this, silence is also a choice. And Martin Luther King knew the destructive power of those who choose not to take a stand. Neutrality has never been innocent. It's part of the problem. Because when you pretend you don't see, you strengthen what is crushing lives. And one day it could be yours. What are you going to do with this now? Are you going to turn the page? Are you going to look for a distraction? Are you going to file this conversation in the part of your brain where you keep uncomfortable things? Or are you going to look at your own behavior, your own omission, your own way of reacting when a black man breaks the script? You need to choose, and that choice says much more about you than about any slap. Because what's at stake isn't the Oscar controversy. It's the normalization of racism. It's the trivialization of pain. It's selective judgment. It's continuous dehumanization. It's what you allow to keep happening just to avoid discomfort. If what you've heard so far has stirred something within you, comment, "I needed to hear this," and share it. Not to spread a video, but so that more people start to hear what should already be impossible to ignore.